few weeks ago when, because I was aware Tom Raworth had studied at Essex University where I currently work, and he did an MA in literary translation in 1969 to 70, and someone had tipped me off that there were some translations of Spanish poems by Tom somewhere to be found. So I went into this big cupboard with lots of old bits of work by students and looked for this, and I did come across a 1970 MA dissertation for literary translation by Tom. But it was, when I opened it, it was called Save Your Eyes, a post-historical novel. So this looked like a sort of unpublished Tom Raworth novel. I'm not sure if it is or not, but it either is. But when you read it, it's 5 novels, 5 short novels, not one novel. And I think it is a novel by Tom Raworth. If it's not, it's a translation of that's undeclared by somebody I don't know, but it sounds like it to me. So 5 novels, and the piece I'll read you is from the 4th one. And this is by, I think, an invented writer called Vicente Huidobro.
Not invented.
Not invented. Okay. So maybe it's a translation by Vicente.
Of, yeah. Will be of.
Huidobro. But you can tell me. Anyways,
I know he exists.
we'll see. Well, so whether it's by that person or invented in the voice of that person, I don't know, but it goes like this. Puss in Boots and Sinbad the Sailor, or Badsin the Styler, a posthumous novel. I have the map of Oratoria fastened to the wall, always before my eyes. Without doubt, the country of my birth is one of the most interesting the world has ever seen. It is what is known as a great nation, filled with important jungles, cloud-chested mountains, and excellent rivers. Of all the countries, mine is the only one worthy of love. When I see a man born elsewhere, I think to myself, how he will suffer from not being born in my country. What a dreadful shame. I cannot help sympathising with him with all my soul. My compatriots, that is to say the others who have the good fortune to have been born in the same country as I, are also the most interesting men in the world, tall, robust, with green skin and without monocles. They are born with waistcoats. It is at the age of 11, natural gloves begin to grow, which have to be trimmed a little every 10 days from then on. The inhabitants of my country are all orators. There are orators whose words perfume flowers and ripen fruit. There are orators whose words light cigarettes. There are orators who alcoholize and intoxicate, from whom you buy a phrase of cognac or a phrase of whiskey or a phrase of pisco and leave reeling and staggering after hearing them. There are orators whose words stop the flow of rivers. Others whose words unbutton overcoats or shine shoes and so on. But among them all, the electric orator stands out. He who electrifies and electrocutes. His words light the bulbs in houses and street lamps and make the city trams run. He is never prevented from speaking. If that happened, all would remain in darkness and the trams would stop. It would be as if there were a general strike. Such an act would be one of sabotage. The electric orator is looked after with a care seldom seen. He is watched every moment to prevent a stumble or the smallest imperfection. 4 workmen who are relieved every 3 hours are employed in oiling his jaws. He is fed through the bottom with enemas of meatball soup, with hedgehogs and fried eggs, with pickled partridges and with many other delicacies that his gourmet behind can relish and deems worthy. In case of an unforeseen breakdown, there are 1,000 records of his voice. But it has been discovered after repeated experiments that when the records are used, the trams go much more slowly, and the light bulbs lose 53% of their energy. For some years, I have lived far away from my country, but nostalgia lets me recall its landscape and its configuration as though it were always before my eyes. To console me for its absence, I read and reread its history. I remember its past, study its present and try to foretell its future. In Oratoria, there are 3 main political parties. The party of those whose right hand trembles when they lift a drink to their lips, and who are called the Sanctiviciusists, the party of those whose left hand trembles, who are called the Spirococcusists, and the party of those whose 2 legs tremble, and whose navel is in relief, like a scapula, and who are known as the Tetranavelgists. As this last name is a little long, people today call them the Where It Fits, because they were discovered behind a plot to stuff it where it fits. This plot was a dreadful thing, which pushed the country to the brink of total disaster. Sometime around the year dot, the anarchist John Saboteur arrived in Oratoria and began to hatch a conspiracy against the government. The conspirators, all members of the Where It Fits party, met in an abandoned cellar under a half-ruined shed which had originally belonged to the Jesuits, then had been a hideout of a band of counterfeiters, then had been a mill whose owner committed suicide and where souls were tormented for several years, and finally had belonged to the Freemasons. The Where It Fits conspirators met there each night at the stroke of midnight. The conspiracy grew and spread in an unacceptable way. The Spirococcusists were then in power, and their police ran about all over the place without being able to discover the den of the government's enemies. The president had roundly declared, "In Oratoria, no one conspires except me." One day, John Saboteur's audacity surpassed all bounds, and he was caught in the very act of hurling a stone into the electric orator's jaws. He was caught in flagrante delicto and taken to jail amid the threats and insults of the populace who wanted to lynch him. At the prison, he was submitted to certain small tortures to make him talk. Some books by celebrated authors were read to him. He was given caviar sandwiches. He was forced to listen to 4 sung masses. His eyes were burned, his nose was mutilated. They split open his stomach, cut off his head, arms and legs, and then pulled out his tongue. They threw him into a cauldron of molten lead, tied him to the tail of a wild horse, showed him 77 pictures by the most famous artists, made him listen to conferences, gave him ham with strawberry cream, and so on. Finally, he confessed everything and gave the names of his accomplices and the place where the clandestine meetings were held. As a reward for his treachery, he was immediately freed and promised a ministerial portfolio to keep him quiet and from conspiring in future. On leaving the prison, John Saboteur shook himself like a dog leaving the water and disappeared, whistling up the street. That is the story of the famous conspiracy, which, as the reader must have realised, cost the lives of many thousands of citizens. Meanwhile, the Sanctiviciusists, taking advantage of the fact that the Spirococcusists were occupied in smothering the Where It Fits, attacked the government palace and seized power. After a few months of the Sanctiviciusists being in power, the Spirococcusists, unable to resign themselves to defeat, began to plot against the new government. Each night they met in the famous cellar which had belonged to the Jesuits, to the counterfeiters, to the suicidal and tormented miller, to the Freemasons, and then, for 3 months, to some cocaine smugglers. The Sanctiviciusist police scoured heaven and earth in vain for the conspirators. There was no way to discover their hideout. Suddenly, the revolution burst out. The Sanctiviciusist troops fought heroically against the Spirococcusists. The new president of the Republic himself directed the attack in the streets against the revolution. The Where It Fits, taking advantage of the confusion, took the government palace and installed themselves there. After 3 days of fighting in the streets, the president returned triumphantly to the government palace, only to find that the real victor was the head of the Where It Fits. The Sanctiviciusist president was captured and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was chained to the rocks on the highest mountain peak. A jaguar was tied at his feet, condemned to eat his entrails eternally and ship them back into his face. So the president, desperate with hunger, had to eat shit that the jaguar had to eat in turn, and so on, forever and ever, an example for all eternity, a symbol of universal life in its endless cycle, like the snake eating its old tail. Once in power, the Where It Fits, fearing new conspiracies, decided to convert the famous cellar of the malcontents into a hospital for expectant mothers who loved Italian opera. Since then, pregnant lovers of Italian opera go to the new hospital to give birth. On arriving at the door, they are asked for no documents. They sing an aria from Aida or Tosca or La Traviata or from any other opera they like, and pass through the arrogant and prominent portal according to their racial condition. During those times, there was a terrible earthquake in Oratorio, which destroyed many homes and made the earth sour. It was soon confirmed that the communists were responsible for this catastrophe. A few leaders were seized, and in their homes the police discovered compromising objects: door knockers, spectacles, meat pies, a thermometer, a bidet, 3 tins of sardines, a divan, an artichoke. All the country's experts filed past these mysterious objects and were able to prove after detailed study that they had been used according to the law of magnets to produce the catastrophe. The communists were burned, and in the light from their blazing bodies, patriotic poems were read and the national dance performed. Peace returned to the land. The country was a basin of milk, a sort of breakfast in the history of the world. The heavens were blue, the sun rose smiling each morning, and everyone went optimistically to work each day. The evenings were calm. Swallows laughed loudly in the air, frolicking like college girls. There were no whirlwinds, because no one had sowed the wind. Giant umbrellas wavered in the sky, peaceful and useless, because the earth was heaven.